Hello? Hello? Please, I know you can hear us. We are trapped here in the spaces between worlds. It is a wonderful yet terrifying place, and only our voices escape. You can help us. You can let us in before we go mad.
Subatomic Inferno by Curtiss Christensen. People in white lab coats surrounded an octagonal enclosure of glass. Monitors and consoles lined the edges below their sight and illuminated the otherwise dim room with blinking white lights. In the center of the enclosure stood a man. He was dressed in a suit similar to deep-sea diving gear. There was a rectangular stainless steel table in front of him. One of the scientists grabbed a microphone from the console in front of him. "Are you ready, Mr. Boyd?" he said. The question echoed in the man's metallic skin. Mr. Boyd gave him a feeble thumbs up from under the heavy mitts on his hands. "Ready as I can be, Siderious, under the circumstance." Boyd's reply piped through speakers mounted on the outer walls of the lab. "You don't have to go through with this. One word and I'll pull the plug. You know more than anyone that we can't track anything outside the suit once you're in," said the scientist. No. We're already this far and I've a little more constitution than the previous volunteers." "All right. Just be careful. And find her. I'm getting tired of sending flowers to people's loved ones. I don't want to have to send a bouquet to myself." "Don't worry, I'll find her. Now send me down before I lose my nerve." Dr. Taylor Siderious flipped open the plexiglass case covering a big black button and pressed it. Air hissed through vents at the top of the glass enclosure. Lights slowly glowed from what looked like a radar dish on the ceiling above Boyd. The scientists waited anxiously. Tension filled the air like a heavy, ominous mist. A droning hum emanated from the center antenna of the dish. Slow blue tendrils of plasma arced from the antenna's metallic bulb, surrounding Boyd. He began to shrink. "Vital signs are nominal," said a female scientist, staring at a screen displaying Boyd's heartbeat, blood oxygen levels, temperature, brain activity, and a smattering of other minor bodily actions. As Boyd shrank, his now almost doll-sized body was piloted through the air and onto the table by automated manipulation of the energy stream. Once on the table, he seemed to shrink out of existence. Boyd's voice came through the speakers. It was pitched slightly higher.
"I can see it. PG-7. It looks like a thick string."
Another scientist shouted, "Reaching atomic levels!"
"Wow, I had studied the molecular models, but I never imagined that they would be this complex up close. So much activity. It's difficult to discern the pattern, but I can see it. By God, I can see it!"
"Subatomic!" The speaker's pitch rose to an almost unbearable soprano, and Boyd's voice compressed into incomprehensible squeaks. "Boyd," said Siderious through the microphone, "speak a bit slower. We are having trouble hearing you at this speed."
"Atoms! They're here, in front of me. The electrons are moving so randomly and rapidly. It is stunning, almost like teleportation. I am at a loss for..."
"He's past subatomic levels. We lost everything other than vitals. All right. We'll give him 30 seconds and reverse the process, said Dr. Siderious. No! Screamed the female medical examiner. Pull him out now! Heart rate is over 170! Siderious pushed a lever, turning the streams of energy from blue to purple. Climbing to 200! We gotta get him out of there or his heart is gonna pop like a balloon! This is as fast as it goes, snarled Siderious. A high-pitched whine squealed from the speakers. Boyd blinked back into visible size and his body levitated off the table. The whine grew louder and the pitch deepened. It was Boyd's voice. He was shrieking at the top of his lungs. His body grew. His howling cracked as his vocal cords shredded from overexertion. The shriek muffled to a hoarse croak. Dr. Siderious slammed his palm onto the black button when Boyd returned to his normal size. Mr. Boyd, try to remain calm, he yelled through the microphone. We'll get you out of there as soon as we can. Boyd's gloved hands scraped against the domed glass of his helmet. His raspy scream continued despite the pain it caused to his frayed voice box. Somehow, he unclasped the straps at his neck and threw the helmet across the enclosure, bouncing it off the table and into the glass. His eyes were dilated and wild. He stared Siderious in the face. Boyd, compose yourself! Boyd's mouth widened in a shocked expression, and he took a running start at the pane of glass between him and Siderious. He jumped into it at full force, his bald head slamming against the glass, shattering it. He crumpled to the floor. Blood ran from a gash on the top of his head. Siderious hurtled over the bank of machinery. Boyd, come on, don't you do this to me. He knelt down beside the collapsed figure and stretched his arms down to try and pick Boyd up. Before he could, Boyd roused from unconsciousness and clenched his fist around a jagged splinter of glass. More blood leaked from his hand. Please, Vern, shouted Siderious, using Boyd's first name in an attempt to personalize his plea. Focus! I need to know. Was she there? Is she alive? Boyd swung his makeshift dagger at Siderious, striking him in the forearm. Bitterness, despair, and anger broke through Siderious's restraint. He straddled Boyd and swung his fist into his cheekbone. Focus, damn you, focus! Was she there? Cried Siderious. Vernon Boyd stabbed the shard into his own neck. Reed O'Neill sat in the corner of his padded cell. He barely lifted his head as the door to his cell opened. 2 men entered with bullpup rifles planted on their shoulders. All right, Mr. O'Neill, stand up, said one. Reed pretended not to hear him. The man took a step and stumbled slightly on the soft floor. Before the minor slip even registered in O'Neill's damaged mind, the inmate pounced like a panther. His elbow collided with the guard's portly gut. His hand grasped the foregrip of the rifle. Reed slid behind the man and pulled the weapon's strap across his throat. The unarmed security guard gagged and sputtered. Stop! I'll shoot! Shouted the other guard. Reed blinked and released the gun in his hands. The man in front of him gasped and collapsed to his knees. Oh, sorry, said Reed. Just get back in the corner and don't move. All right, responded Reed with his hands above his head. Would you really have shot your friend? Go! Shouted the guard. Reed walked past the gagging man. The guard grabbed his rifle and crawled back to the door. The other one depressed the switch on his radio. We need reinforcements in Mr. O'Neill's cell. He is proving difficult. Get the aides to bring restraints, he said. Really, I didn't mean to. There's no need for all the hubbub, said Reed. Several hospital attendants came in with a dolly and a straitjacket. They restrained him and strapped him to the dolly. The attendants wheeled him out, and Reed felt the gun barrels trained at his back. They pushed him through the facility and out its entrance. For the first time in years, Reed O'Neill felt sunlight settle on his cheekbones. It meant nothing to him. Half his mind wondered what was happening, and the other half was already subtly undoing the straps of the jacket, vying for blood. He slipped the restraint and thrust his freed fist at the attendant behind him. His knuckles collided with a chin. The attendant collapsed backward. The other grabbed the handle of the dolly and dumped Reed into the car. He slammed against the side of the vehicle. O'Neill had a vague inkling that his ribs were bruised, but it didn't hurt. The two guards stood a safe distance away. "Get in!" cried one hoarsely. Reed saw a red mark on his neck. "Are you all right? You look like you've been strangled," he said with genuine concern. The guard's hand unconsciously rubbed at his neck. "Shut up and get in the car," said the guard. The door swung open. The butt of a rifle struck O'Neill's chest. He fell backward onto a leather seat. Arms pushed his legs in and the door shut. The car started moving. Reed saw a man sitting to his left. He unfastened the rest of his jacket and sprung toward the man. His fist hit an unseen sheet of plexiglass. "I see your reputation is well earned. You will find that we have took the utmost of precautions," said Siderious. He slid a file through a small slot in the plexiglass. "This is my offer. Your trial is soon. 12 known and 7 more to be determined. The jury won't see kindly. You'll face lethal injection." "It wasn't me. I didn't do it. I did, but it wasn't really me. You dig?" "I don't care in the slightest. I have my own goal. Just look at my offer and decide if you want to help me help you." Reed grabbed the documents. The file declared life. O'Neill read words that would allow him a wonderful life. Every need would be fulfilled. Every desire he wished would be granted. He would be freer than any other man in similar circumstance. There was even a floor plan of his new home. It imprisoned him, but he had rooms upon rooms to live in. He would be a rabid canary in a gorgeous cage. "What assurances can you give me?" asked Reed. "I offer no assurance beyond being allowed to live. After that, I have many resources at my command. The government is particularly interested in my work, and I hold a lot of weight. I can guarantee that, regardless of the outcome, your living conditions will improve significantly," replied Siderious. "Well, you can take your offer and shove it where the—" said one side of Reed. "I will consider it," said O'Neill, cutting off his reactionary response. "Consideration or not, I will be sending you down. Your rights mean nothing now. We both know you are guilty. You have no rights. You will comply or you will die." Reed looked around the car. He couldn't remember how he had gotten there. "What's happening? Are you here to take me to a new asylum?" "Did you hear a word I said? Whatever. It doesn't matter. We need someone like you. Someone detached from the experience. I will try to fill you in on the details when we arrive, though I doubt you will be able to absorb them properly." "Okay," responded a confused O'Neill. The black sedan arrived at its destination. The door opened, and immediately Reed pounced at the men waiting for him. cattle prods jammed into his skin. He felt no pain, but his body contorted from the electrical impulse. They shackled his arms and legs. Siderious exited the vehicle and his cadre led them into the complex. They walked through hallway after hallway until they neared the laboratory. "So how do you feel?" asked Siderious. "Feel?" asked Reed. "Yeah, we are about to stuff you into a metal suit and shrink you to less than microscopic size. Did you read the file? Do you have any misgivings at all?" Not really. Where am I again?" "You are in a government facility, about to embark on one of the most important research studies of our lifetime. How does that make you feel?" "Oh, all right. I feel okay." "Excellent." They stepped into a locker room of sorts. Dr. Siderious grabbed a suit hanging on the wall. "Here, put this on." "What is it?" "It is an all-purpose hazmat suit that allows you to breathe at a sub-microscopic level, lets us monitor your vital signs, and communicate as you are shrunken down." "'Kay," said Reed. The cautious soldiers unlocked his restraints. He waited until the cuffs were fully removed before grabbing the nearest man. He managed to take a bite out of the shoulder of the guard before the rest wrestled him into the suit. O'Neill could almost feel a sense of nervousness invading his body, but it was so far away that he chose to ignore it. They pulled the suit over his shoulders and zipped it closed. "Follow me," said Siderious. They entered a small room full of medical devices. A man inside prepared a syringe. He took a needle and jabbed Reed's neck. "What's that?" asked O'Neill in a disturbingly flat tone for a man that had just been unwillingly injected with some unknown substance. "It is a carefully proportioned chemical cocktail of dextromethorphan, methylphenidate, and phenelzine to enhance your dissociative disorder and counter some of its negative effects. It should help you to focus and separate yourself from what you may encounter," said Dr. Siderious. "Sounds good," Reed said. He could already feel himself drifting away from his body even as his hand grabbed the needle from the other doctor and stabbed it into his eye. From his perspective, it was like watching his body acting on a movie screen, and every detail around him was highlighted in remarkable detail. He found the spout of blood coming from the unknown doctor's eye to be particularly beautiful. A domed helmet was shoved over his head. The soldiers led him into the newly repaired glass enclosure and positioned him under the dish. O'Neill just watched himself intently from beside the table, wondering what was going to happen next. The only thing missing was a bucket of popcorn. "Here, on this surface," said Dr. Siderious through the helmet's speaker, "is PG-7, the largest synthetic molecule ever created by man. This is what you are to examine. It is not important to tell us what it looks like at the atomic and subatomic level. We know that much. Just focus on what lies below. We need to know the structures that are beneath the atom. In every other test, the subatomic energies have scrambled all the suit's electrical systems. We can't record down there, so you need to absorb the details and report them back. Can you do that?" Reed observed his body nodding the affirmative. "And above all else, focus on who else is there. We need to find her and get her out. You hear me? Get her out. All right then, let's get started." "Get who out?" asked O'Neill. "You'll know when you see her." Reed looked at the little string on the table. It looked like a tiny severed segment of a diseased rat's tail. "You're all going to die," said Reed. "Here we go. I am about to shrink you. Once I press this button, the journey will begin. Don't be alarmed. You will be all right." "I'm not worried. This'll be a cakewalk," said Reed, even though he hadn't thought to say that. Dr. Siderious pressed the button. The lights glowed, the hum sang, and tendrils of blue plasma enveloped O'Neill. Reed's body shrank and floated.
"Doing all right so far?"
asked Siderious. "A-okay." Reed's perspective shrank with his body. In front of him was a tube. Soon the tube grew into a spiral of organized chaos. Nuclei exchanged electrons. The electrons passed between the nuclei like they were playing some light-speed game of billiards. It happened instantaneously, but Reed kept track of everything. He mapped out a strange pattern of existence in his mind. They formed the pattern of entwined trees spiraling into infinity. Siderious spoke inside Reed's helmet.
"We are about to lose communication. Make sure to pay attention of what you see from here on out."
O'Neill shrank further into the atoms. He entered one and was engulfed in what seemed like fire, rising in every direction. It was chaos and order, currents of flame, in a color spectrum seen only by an unfortunate few, pulled and whirled his body. He watched his body jolt this way and that, adrift in the currents and eddies of this tumultuous lake. Suddenly, Reed found himself viewing this atomscape from his own eyes. He no longer observed himself from afar. He experienced everything first person. This is when the agony struck. Even beneath the lead-lined confines of his suit, he felt pain unlike anything he had ever experienced before. His nervous system ignited. He was freezing and burning at the same time. The drugs helped, but only enough to keep his mind from retreating into a catatonic state. He saw something else amidst the flows of the energy. Amorphous blobs, cancerous flesh, and spiked bone drifted around him. None matched another in any discernible way, except that their bloated bodies were covered in appendages, some tentacled gobs of gangrenous decay, others segmented calcified scythes, and most a mixture of both. For the first time in his life, Reed O'Neill felt an emotion: fear. The energies around him took on twisted humanoid forms. They looked like the contorted shadows of men. Reed could hear them. A cacophony of tortured voices moaned, screamed, and pleaded. Pain dug deeper into Reed's core. Agony ricocheted within O'Neill's skull. Anguish finally broke through the barriers. No drug could prevent Reed from the utter devastation he felt. It was ineffable in its quality of suffering, so immense that he shrieked continually from the sensation, unfathomable in its depth. His heart jumped in his chest with no rhythm. It beat in random tempo with the coursing streams of liquid fire. Regret and self-hatred burned holes through his mind. In its midst, he felt the woman. Her image burned into his mind. It was devastating. She drifted with a cracked helmet among the floating blobs and flowing flames. The blob creatures huddled around her as if they were ravenous vultures feasting on roadkill. She cried out to Reed, but he could only hear one word of her plea. "Help!" she called. Through the pain, Reed half recalled some instruction about her. He tried to move toward her. His arms swung through the energy, fighting the aching in his joints. He drifted closer and closer until the expression on her face showed past the cracks on her helmet. Her lips curled in a defiant snarl but torture was written across the creases of her skin. Her golden hair seemed to sizzle and writhe with a life of its own. And then Reed grew. He rose from the Inferno, away from the tumorous decaying monstrosities. He saw neutrons and protons, surrounded by a fog of ever-shifting electrons. The dendritic structures of artificially positioned atoms, the spiraling tube of molecular architecture. Reed O'Neill lifted from the table, and he regained his former size.
Mr. O'Neill, Reed, what did you see? Did you find her?
Shouted Siderious from his position safely outside the panes. I saw.
Yes, what?
It's hard to remember.
You must. Tell me.
Reed remained silent.
Bah! Have another syringe of the drugs prepared,
commanded Siderious. O'Neill nearly wet his pants. He banged an iron mitt on the glass. He didn't quite understand why, but the notion of returning to subatomic size terrified him.
No, you can't do this to me. We had a deal, Siderious,
shouted Reed, while internally the other part of him just yowled like a frightened animal.
Now you can remember? How convenient. Where was that memory when you were shrunken? The deal's off, O'Neill. You'll be going back to the asylum at our earliest convenience. However, we won't be shrinking you again. I will be going, replied Siderious.
Murmurs of dissent echoed through the room.
You're mad as O'Neill,
protested one.
Good, then this should work. I have my doubts that it was his mental illness anyway. The drugs should be enough, said Siderious.
You know what will happen. Reed was an anomaly, but even he suffered from heart arrhythmia. You, Siderious? Well, I won't mince words. You're about 2 cheeseburgers from a coronary, said the woman monitoring vitals.
It's my daughter. I was a fool to send her, and a fool to send that lunatic. I'm the only one who can bring her back.
Siderious looked around. No one else brought up any arguments. He nodded in satisfaction.
Now, if you're all done bellyaching, said Siderious, pointing to the glass enclosure, get him out of there.
The 2 security personnel forced the suit off Reed. His body fought as they pinned him to the ground. After much struggling, several bloody noses, broken ribs, and bruised egos, they had Reed in handcuffs. Siderious stopped them as they led him out of the room.
No, he said. I want him to stay. I have a different fate for O'Neill. I've changed my mind. He won't be going back to the asylum. After I return with my daughter, we are going to send him back down. But this time we won't unshrink him.
The guards slammed Reed into a folding chair as Siderious climbed into the empty suit. He was injected with the serum. He took his place in the center of the glass cage with a sense of resolve. Siderious knew that he would most likely die, but he faced that potential without falter. Reed felt a sense of distant, disjointed admiration and disgust. He was throwing his life away, the faint prospect of rescuing his daughter. Siderious clamped the helmet down and started shouting orders.
This is it. I won't be leading you anymore. This is a rescue mission, and after that, I'm done. If I survive, you will have to carry on in my footsteps. But me, I can't do it anymore. Shrink me down. I'm ready, he said.
The blue tendrils grabbed him and shrank him down.
I never knew,
he said before he shrank below the reach of communication. Reed fiddled with the shackles. The guard hadn't properly cinched down the one on his left wrist. The woman watching vitals started hollering about blood pressure. The iron scraped skin off the top of O'Neill's thumb. Siderious and someone else grew from the table. Reed pulled free from the handcuff. The guards moved away from Reed to get a better look at Siderious and his daughter.
Dear Lord, she's still alive! How could she survive with her suit compromised? Someone shouted. Let me through. He needs first aid, said the medic. Amidst the chaos, no one saw Reed slinking toward the guard. His arms reached up for the man's neck. Siderious shook his head and waved the medical team toward his daughter, completely oblivious that they were already evaluating her condition. The team ignored him and pried his helmet free. Reed swung the handcuffs around the guard's throat. He grabbed the free cuff and pulled until the metal links dug into flesh. The man scratched at his neck, trying to get his fingers under the chain. The other guard shouldered his rifle. Reed shoved his victim between himself and the gun, but the barrel wasn't pointed at him. It was aimed at Siderious. Siderious stood rigidly, holding the medics at bay. His face contorted in pain. His suit warped and expanded. The metal cracked, sending shrapnel flying. Rivets and jagged shards of metal shot through the medical team and pattered against the glass. His belly bloated out of the suit. Skin stretched outward. A tumorous mass writhed within. Siderious, somehow still alive, said,
My darling Rose, I'm sorry.
His gut burst. Blood showered the glass walls, obscuring the view inside. The guard panicked and fired his bullpup into the glass. The bullets cracked the first layer and lay suspended against the mottled red mixture of viscera. The previous pandemonium stilled to charged silence. A sickly yellow scythe punched out from the enclosure. The glass shattered. An enormous mass of cancerous flesh flopped out over the shards. Its eyes were randomly dotted grotesque warts. Along with the scythe of bone, 2 more arms extended away from its girth. A set of serrated pincers topped one and a spike attached to the top of various joints. Rotting greenish-white musculature gave the limbs motion. The creature pulled itself around by casting out what looked like webs of barbed red tendrils. Reed dropped the guard. He grabbed the gun and backed away from the blob. The other guard fired. The creature's pincer shot out and snagged him. He continued to fire as he was lifted from the floor. The rounds plunged into bulges of diseased flesh. They pulverized a few of the yellow eyes. The being didn't even make a sound. The pincers slowly sawed the man in half as he screamed and pulled the trigger until his rifle ran empty. His separated legs fell to the floor. Reed took aim. His hands fumbled with the gun. He couldn't figure out how to use it. The trigger resisted his index finger. It may as well have been an alien artifact. He scoffed and his arms chucked it at the creature. It thudded against the thing and skidded across the floor. Everyone else stumbled for the door amidst the panic. The scythe cut them down and the spike impaled them. The survivors slipped on blood as they tried to press through the exit door. Reed's legs pressed him toward the monstrosity. He didn't want to go. He wanted to escape with the rest of them, but the other part of him had a different idea. He grasped a long shard of glass. It cut into his palm and fingers. The spiked appendage darted toward him. Reed dove. It swung past and buried itself into the floor. Reed's body sprang up and his hands slashed at the arm's connective tissues. Severed tendons sprayed pus. Without hesitation, Reed sprinted along the injured appendage toward the blob. His hand slashed at the bulk of the mass. Sheets of inflamed flesh broke free. The glass dug through Reed's hand until it rubbed against his bones. The pincers scraped together behind him. It sounded like grinding teeth. He slammed his shoulder against the smooth side of the bony weapon. He rebounded off of it and fell onto his back. His glass dagger shot out of reach. The pincer opened. It slammed over Reed's body, stopped only by concrete. It started to close around his chest. Bits of cement broke free from the floor in the path of the bone saws. Reed's arms tried to push him out from under, but his hands slid through slimy pus and human fluids. The sawtooth pincers gyrated as they grew close to his torso. Suddenly, a round helmet smacked the pincers and clattered next to O'Neill. Even as he wondered how it had gotten there, he grabbed its cracked faceplate and pressed it between the pincers. The serrated bone caught on the helmet. They shuddered from the effort of sawing through hardened metal. Reed grabbed the pincers in both hands and slid himself out from under them. He stood up. O'Neill wanted to retreat, but his legs rooted stalwart, and his fists clenched. A bloody figure stood with him. Reed saw Rose. Rage etched her face and murder filled her suit up to the neck. She sprang forward with incredible agility given the diving suit's constraints. Her metal hand crashed into one of the pincers. It cracked like a rotten chicken bone. Black marrow spattered out from the broken saw blade. Reed cinched the empty handcuff over the knuckles of his right hand. The remaining undamaged pincer swung into Rose Siderious. She was tossed through the air, but the suit spared her of any meaningful damage. O'Neill sidestepped a swipe of the scythe and drove again into the central mass of the being. His makeshift steel knuckles struck over and over again. Reed didn't know it, but his other half wasn't aiming to cause much damage. The scythe whistled through the air toward him. Reed narrowly avoided it. The boned blade stabbed into the creature. O'Neill's foot kicked the sinewy back of the scythe, driving it deeper into the tumorous interior of the being. Rose, regaining her footing, jabbed at the side of the monstrosity. Eyeballs popped under her glove. She shrieked in bloodlust. Her punches drove holes into the nightmarish blob. The scythe pulled free from its own body with a sickly, suctioning sound. Reed's body, despite his mind's protestation, dug into the wound like a parasitic worm. He clawed with his fingernails through the cancerous mounds of flesh. Webbed tendrils wrapped themselves around his arms as the wound closed around him. Pus and tumors pressed against his body. Reed was being crushed by gangrenous flesh. The stench suffocated him first. Then globules of acrid fat flowed over him. Finally, fetid flesh grew over the fat. It covered his face. Reed struggled for oxygen. Tendrils followed his breath into his throat. Metal wrapped around his ankles. Reed was ripped from the interior of the creature. The tendrils tore out of his trachea. His body fell out of the mass with a schlup. He rolled over to face Rose Siderious. She let go of his leg and extended her arm to him. He grabbed it as the spike pierced her skull. Reed felt a strange pang of loss that was unfamiliar to him. Her hand went limp under the iron mitt. Reed pulled himself over Rose's corpse. He punched the cuff into the spike. Reed's fingers dislocated at the first knuckles. The bone spike fractured. Reed's left hand grabbed it and pulled it free from Rose. He pinned it under his armpit. The broken pincer slashed at him. Reed easily dodged it. The scythe came down, anticipating his movement. Reed narrowly avoided being eviscerated, but the blade carved a gash through his shoulder. O'Neill hooked his arm over the limb. It flicked him off onto the back of the creature. His fall was broken by squelching, squishy flesh. He scrambled to his feet and drove the spike into the center of the being. The creature writhed and flailed its appendages randomly. The scythe hit the spike, digging it further down. The broken pincer slashed at Reed. Its blunt side nailed him and sent him sailing off the creature. Reed shook the pounding from his head. He looked at the blob and saw both remaining limbs cutting and filleting the creature at the sight of the spike. Its movements slowed until it stopped altogether. It was finally dead. Reed O'Neill collapsed on the floor amongst the blood and pus. He heaved just to fill his lungs, but it felt good. He was astonished to feel anything. Memories of the subatomic Inferno assaulted him as he rested. The creatures were in everything and everyone. Nowhere was safe. No one was untouched. The thought was chilling, but also exhilarating. Reed's calling was killing. It was his reason for living. For the first time in his life, both halves of Reed O'Neill reconciled their differences. This has been Subatomic Inferno, written and recorded by Curtiss Christensen for audiostories.com. Thanks for listening.
Fuck.